Strong Thacker and Minions and Monsters follows the Minions once again. Now this time in 1920s Hollywood, being the biggest stars at the time, but one Minion in particular, James, desires to be a filmmaker and to make a monster movie. And to do this, he ends up summoning ancient monsters, which of course goes monsterly wrong. Despicable Me. The animated franchise that has ruled the world since 2010, with 7 films, those being the main 4 Despicable Me films, and the 3 Minion spin-offs. It's become the highest grossing animated film franchise of all time, and it just became the 13th highest grossing film franchise ever, surpassing Middle-earth. Yes, you're not hallucinating. I did just say these yellow Tic Tacs made more money than The Lord of the Rings. What is wrong with our society? But then you have the Minions and Monsters. I wasn't looking forward to this. The previous one in this franchise, Despicable Me 4, was really close to being really bad, and a franchise where most of the films aren't very good. Yes, I do have a special place in my heart for the first 2 films, but from Minions on, this franchise just hasn't been very good. So I wasn't expecting much from Minions and Monsters, but I did have that little voice in the back of my head that kept saying the second Minions film was actually good, a rarity for this franchise, and was a huge improvement over the first Minions. So I was thinking there was a slim chance that maybe this could be another improvement. And then as it got closer to its release, it became the highest rated film in the franchise, even above the original. So now my interest was definitely piqued. So now I've seen Minions and Monsters, I think the critics are being a bit too positive, but this is good. I don't think this is the best film in this franchise. I think I spoiled the first 2 Despicable Me films. But again, yes, this is good, which is saying a lot for this franchise. I don't know why we're putting more effort into the spin-offs than the main films, but whatever. Minions and Monsters continues the strange trend of the Minions films getting better, while the Despicable Me films get worse. Starting off, yeah, this is a huge love letter to cinema. So many Easter eggs and references to 1920s classic Hollywood. I was constantly doing the Leonardo DiCaprio pudding meme like every 5 seconds. I always love getting film that is about filmmaking, and this is no exception. And this also led me to actually be able to be invested into the Minions for once. I've always said, it's hard to be invested into the Minions without Gru. That's the main reason why the first Minions film doesn't really work, and why the second one actually does work. But this time around, we're just following the Minions again, without Gru, but I was actually invested, particularly in the main Minion, James, who wants to be a filmmaker. That of course is very relatable to me. It also does use the setting time period to its fullest extent. I will say make sure getting into the monsters part of the movie is when it started to lose a lot of my interest. Then is when it starts to become more of just a generic Minions movie. But there were some fun enough set pieces, to where I didn't dislike it by any means. But the first half is definitely superior, and it's also looking like it's probably the beginning of the end for this franchise, as this one had the lowest opening of the entire franchise, even below the original, and is expected to be the lowest grossing film in the franchise, again even below the original. So it looks like the franchise we once thought was bulletproof might be starting to crumble. Now I do think there are 2 reasons for this. For one, this franchise has been going on consistently for 16 years. Most franchises by this point aren't even still going. Most start to fizzle out by 8 years in, let alone almost 2 decades. It's impressive it's lasted this long, but maybe franchise fatigue has finally caught up. But I do think if this is the case, it happened very suddenly, as the previous film, Despicable Me 4, made $986.7 million, almost $1 billion. So this is a very sharp downturn. And second, I still think kids are interested in this. The 1920s Hollywood setting isn't going to be interesting to kids, and they're just not going to be able to get into it. If Despicable Me 5 happens, which I think it likely will, I'm very curious to see how it does. Now how can this franchise avoid crashing and burning? This franchise really needs to pull a Toy Story. It needs to go on hiatus for close to maybe even over a decade. And then once it comes back, people will be hungry for another one. They'll be actually wanting it. There'll be more kids who will have seen the previous films and will now want to see this one. Overall, I actually surprisingly liked Minions and Monsters. It was actually good. If you have anything else better to do, then yeah, I wouldn't say this is a bad watch. I would recommend it. But now let's talk about the actual reason you clicked on this video, the Odyssey. The Odyssey follows Odysseus, a king who goes to Troy for war. and ends up being away from his kingdom for 20 years, as he faces one battle after another, all the while trying his best to survive and make it back home. Christopher Nolan. At this point, I think it's pretty common knowledge that Nolan's one of the best known directors of all time. Dark Knight, Inception, Interstellar, Oppenheimer, I could keep going. So after Oppenheimer was released in 2023, everyone was wondering what would Nolan's next film be. And then he revealed he was going to make an adaptation of the Odyssey. And it immediately became one of the most anticipated films of all time. I love old fantasy adventure movies like Sinbad, Jason the Argonauts, King Kong, and more recent films like Lord of the Rings. And the Odyssey is one of the oldest stories like this, dating all the way back to around 700 BCE. That's thousands of years older than the Bible. It directly inspired things like Sinbad and Lord of the Rings. And I had read the Odyssey and loved it. So I was of course unbelievably excited for the Odyssey. So now I've seen the Odyssey, it's absolutely stellar. Starting off, something I think this film does very well that could have been done very poorly is grounding these fantasy elements. Nolan is known for really taking high fantasy elements and really packing them down in an easy digest and simpler way. And here we get to see Nolan do this to fantasy. These iconic fantasy elements, Cyclops, sirens, ghosts, are all portrayed in a still fantastical but grounded way. It stays true to what made these things so great in the first place. Speaking of which, that Cyclops scene, I was eagerly anticipating it, and oh did it deliver. This is a genuine horror sequence. It doesn't skip out on that aspect at all. This is terrifying. It uses darkness and lets your imagination do a lot of the heavy lifting to further enhance the scene without having to show everything. I was on the edge of my seat, heart pumping out of my chest. And I really appreciate that Cyclops isn't fully CGI. It's a real 80-foot tall animatronic, which is just enhanced with CGI. There are several scenes like this throughout the film that are downright horror. The other one I don't even want to talk about, cause you have to see it. All I'll say is that it involves pigs. They had my jaw to the ground how terrifyingly well done they were. And I do think it was a very smart decision not to give any sound to the Song of the Sirens. It can never truly be captured in a way that perfectly encapsulates it. So just having Odysseus react to it and describe it was perfect. And there are of course a whole bucket load of practical effects. Real ships, weapons, cities, on-location shooting, costumes. They all just look fantastic. But it doesn't shy away from CGI when it's needed. Which, like I mentioned with the Cyclops, is mainly used just to enhance the practical effects and is used sparingly. And man, does this film get suspenseful. In this film's climax, I was quite literally on the edge of my seat. I haven't felt that watching a film since I first saw Return of the King. The climax is probably one of the best action sequences I've ever seen. This film's also told a non-linear structure, which is exactly how it should have been. This film was told from start to end in chronological order. Lord, it would have been a drag. But this format allows it to have excellent pacing, with not sticking around in one location or storyline for too long. And man, the acting in this film was phenomenal. Damon, Hathaway, Pattinson, Holland, Leguizamo, all bringing their A game to this, and it really shows. And these characters are of course great. They are brought to life impeccably well. But of course when it comes to the actual story and characters, I can only give Nolan so much credit, as most of that belongs to Homer. Now when it comes to the film's soundtrack, by Ludwig Göransson, is to no surprise great. But I know, right? Big shocker. The guy made a soundtrack for Sinners made another great soundtrack. But although it is great, it is very subtle. It's intense subtle. And like with the scenes in Troy, and the climax is really effective. But at least to me, I do feel like as though maybe it was a bit too subtle. For a story like the Odyssey, I would expect something bigger and more striking. I do feel like maybe someone a different composer, like maybe a Hans Zimmer, Howard Shore, James Newton Howard, I would have ended up liking it a bit more. But again, still loved it, it was great. And I probably should mention the biggest complaint people had with this film leading up to it. The historical inaccuracies. Now the costumes are accurate to the time period for when the story takes place. Modern English is used for dialogue instead of elegant old speech. And yeah, for like 5 minutes I noticed it, but after that, I completely forgot about it. Yes, I do think it would have been a little cherry on top, if it did have that speed that was more accurate to the time period. But also it does work just as well without it. And also, this is a fictional story. As long as it does end up adapting the story properly, it taking some liberties is fine. Overall, I absolutely loved The Odyssey. It's my favorite and the best film of the year. Well, at least so far, but I doubt that's gonna change. I couldn't recommend it more. But leave in the comments below, what do you think about Minions and Monsters? And what do you think about The Odyssey? Also, if you ended up enjoying this video, then consider liking and subscribing. But I guess for now, bye-bye, Scarlet Thacker. It's interstellar. I did not mean to say that.